Welcome to this comprehensive breakdown of 7th July UPSC Curriculum Update covering 10 crucial General Studies Paper 2 and Paper 3 learning modules. This session is designed to give aspirants a structured, exam-orientated understanding of topics ranging from urban flooding and climate resilience to constitutional morality and electoral reforms. Each module has been carefully selected based on current relevance, syllabus weightage, and high probability of appearing in both preliminary and mains examinations. We will cover Mumbai floods and climate-resilient infrastructure, citizenship and electoral roles, urban governance and disaster preparedness, climate change and extreme weather events, monsoon disaster management, Samagra Shiksha and education governance, electoral roll verification and reforms, constitutional morality and rule of law, ethics in disaster governance, and urban infrastructure planning. These topics span disaster management, governance, environmental issues, education policy, and ethics, providing a holistic approach to current affairs integrated with static syllabus components. Stay focused, take notes, and prepare to gain a decisive analytical edge. Let us begin this systematic journey through the most pressing issues defining the contemporary UPSC examination landscape and equip you with the knowledge needed to score high marks consistently. Segment 1, Mumbai floods and urban flooding management. Slide 2, urban flooding and climate-resilient infrastructure. The recent severe disruptions across the Konkan coast highlight a growing crisis in urban disaster management that demands urgent policy attention. The active southwest monsoon, characterized by strong, moisture-laden southwesterly winds sweeping over the western Ghats, has brought intense and unrelenting rainfall to the region. This meteorological event has caused severe disruption, particularly in Mumbai, where heavy, short-duration downpours have coincided with high tides, completely overwhelming the municipal networks and leading to widespread urban paralysis. This topic maps directly to General Studies Paper 3, covering critical domains of disaster management, environmental degradation, and infrastructure planning. It is essential for analyzing the vulnerabilities of coastal megacities and understanding the urgent need for climate-resilient frameworks. For aspirants, this case study provides a practical lens through which to examine the intersection of climate change, urban planning failures, and governance deficits in metropolitan India. Let us now examine the specific causes and challenges driving this crisis in detail. Urban flooding, causes and challenges. The crisis of urban flooding in Indian cities is driven by a combination of design deficits, topographic vulnerabilities, and haphazard urbanization that has accumulated over decades. First, design deficits play a critical role. Urban flooding is increasingly driven by rainfall intensity rather than sheer volume, and current city drainage systems are fundamentally ill-equipped to handle several hundred millimeters of rain falling in short bursts within hours. Second, topography creates serious vulnerabilities. Mumbai, for example, sits on a peninsula constructed largely on reclaimed land, former marshes, and tidal flats, leaving the city naturally prone to severe flooding when heavy rain coincides with high tides. Third, decades of haphazard urbanization and uncontrolled concretization have created vast impermeable surfaces across metropolitan areas. These concrete landscapes accelerate stormwater runoff, preventing natural absorption into the soil and instantly overwhelming municipal drainage infrastructure. Understanding these interconnected causes is essential for crafting comprehensive answers on urban disaster management and climate-resilient infrastructure development for the examination. Climate change and extreme rainfall. The changing monsoon patterns driven by climate change are rendering historic weather assumptions completely obsolete and creating unprecedented challenges for urban India. We are witnessing a significant increase in the frequency of erratic, extreme rainfall events that our legacy infrastructure was never designed to withstand. This directly translates to tragic loss of life and property, as the collapse of weak structures, particularly vulnerable housing like Chaulsa in low-lying urban pockets, turns drainage problems into severe human crisis. This shift has devastating consequences for linear infrastructure as well. Extreme rainfall frequently triggers cascading infrastructure failures, such as severe landslides along major motorways and vital rail routes like the Bhor Ghat. These incidents highlight how easily natural disasters can paralyze regional connectivity and economic lifelines, creating severe systemic bottlenecks. The Bhor Ghat vulnerability serves as a stark warning of how climate-induced disasters easily paralyze vital regional connectivity, emphasizing the need for infrastructure redesign and proactive disaster preparedness frameworks. Government initiatives for urban flooding. Several key government initiatives aim to address urban flooding, though significant execution challenges remain on the ground. The Brimstone project was launched specifically for Mumbai following the catastrophic July 2005 floods, with its primary objective being to widen old drains and install heavy pumping stations to manage severe inundation. However, key phases of this critical project remain incomplete even after 2 decades. At the central level, the Smart Cities Mission and Amrit are designed to upgrade urban stormwater infrastructure and integrate smart technology into municipal water monitoring systems. Additionally, the National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA, a statutory body functioning under the Ministry of Home Affairs, has issued specific guidelines on urban flooding. The NDMA strongly advocates for the dedicated separation of stormwater drainage from municipal sewage networks and the establishment of real-time urban flood warning systems to improve proactive disaster response capabilities. Aspirants must remember the specific institutional mandate that NDMA operates under the Home Ministry, not the Urban Development Ministry. Way forward: building climate-resilient cities. To build genuine resilience against urban flooding, a multi-pronged approach is required, combining nature-based solutions, governance reforms, and engineering upgrades. First, under nature-based solutions, India must transition toward the sponge cities model. This involves developing urban wetlands, installing permeable pavements, and mandating retention ponds to naturally absorb and manage rainfall runoff. Second, under governance reforms, the focus must shift to waste and catchment planning. This requires coordinating efforts across jurisdictions, ensuring municipal bodies, railway zones, and highway authorities work in unison rather than in silos. Third, under engineering solutions, design standards must be comprehensively upgraded. Civil infrastructure must be fundamentally redesigned to factor in extreme weather realities, moving away from outdated historical assumptions that no longer apply to contemporary climate conditions. This integrated approach, combining green infrastructure, institutional coordination, and updated engineering standards, offers a comprehensive pathway toward climate-resilient urban development in coastal megacities. UPSC Corner, Value Addition, and PYQ Linkage. For mains preparation, a crucial previous year question from 2020 asks candidates to account for the huge flooding of major cities in India in recent years, giving examples, and discuss mechanisms for mitigation. A model practice question states, urban flooding in India is no longer an act of God but a failure of urban governance and foresight. Evaluate the structural and non-structural measures required to build climate-resilient urban infrastructure in coastal megacities. This 15-mark, 250-word answer should integrate both governance analysis and infrastructure solutions. For prelims, aspirants must remember specific project mandates. The Brimstone project was designed specifically for Mumbai after the 2005 deluge, not the National Capital Region. Furthermore, the National Disaster Management Authority is a statutory body functioning under the Union Ministry of Home Affairs. These factual distinctions are frequently tested in preliminary examinations and require careful memorization along with understanding the broader context of urban disaster management governance in India. If you find this analysis helpful, subscribe to the channel for more structured UPSC content. Segment 2: Citizenship and Electoral Roles. Citizenship, electoral roles and constitutional rights. A major constitutional discussion has re-emerged in the public sphere regarding the foundational nature of voting rights in India. The current debate centers on whether the right to vote should be elevated to a full fundamental right, moving away from its current legal classification as merely a statutory entitlement. Historically, for over 7 decades, the Supreme Court of India has consistently maintained the stance that voting is not a fundamental right but rather a statutory entitlement granted by law through parliamentary legislation. This topic is highly relevant for the UPSC examination, mapping directly to General Studies Paper 2. It requires a deep understanding of constitutional provisions, the mechanisms of judicial review, the Representation of the People Act, and the functioning of constitutional bodies like the Election Commission of India. For aspirants, this represents an intersection of constitutional law, democratic theory, and contemporary governance debates that frequently appear in both preliminary and mains examinations, requiring nuanced analysis and balanced perspectives on rights jurisprudence. Citizenship framework in India. The framework for Indian citizenship is governed by both constitutional provisions and parliamentary legislation operating in tandem. Articles 5 to 11 under Part 2 of the Constitution manage the foundational citizenship rules governing acquisition and termination. Crucially, Article 11 grants Parliament broad, overarching powers to regulate the acquisition and termination of citizenship through appropriate legislation, making this a domain where legislative authority is supreme within constitutional limits. The primary legislation is the Citizenship Act of 1955, which manages naturalization procedures. Over time, this act has evolved, moving away from jus soli, which is birthplace-based citizenship, towards stricter rules based on lineage and documentation requirements. Recently, the 2019 amendment, which was formally operationalized in 2024, introduced significant changes. This amendment created fast-tracked naturalization pathways specifically for non-Muslim minorities fleeing religious persecution from neighboring countries, marking a distinct shift in the naturalization framework that has generated significant constitutional debate and requires careful analysis. Electoral roles and Election Commission. Article 326 of the Constitution mandates that elections to the Lok Sabha and legislative assemblies must be based on adult suffrage, ensuring every eligible citizen over 18 years has the right to register and vote. To maintain these registries, the Election Commission conducts the Special Intensive Revision, a highly document-heavy verification exercise aimed at updating electoral rolls and removing duplicate or invalid entries. However, this process has led to concerns regarding civic exclusions in practice. Mass voter roll updates during these SIR exercises have triggered significant anxieties over large-scale voter deletions, particularly in specific border districts, raising questions about the delicate balance between electoral integrity and universal enfranchisement. For aspirants, understanding the tension between maintaining accurate rolls and ensuring no eligible citizen is wrongfully excluded is crucial for tackling questions on electoral governance, the role of the Election Commission, and the practical implementation of universal adult suffrage in a country of India's scale and complexity. Constitutional issues and judicial perspective. The legal status of voting presents what scholars term the paradox of choice. The Supreme Court has ruled that certain key elements related to voting are protected fundamental rights, including freedom of voting under Article 19, 1a, the voter's right to know candidate histories, established in 2002, and the right to reject all candidates via nota, which was recognized in 2013. Yet, paradoxically, the basic act of voting itself remains treated merely as a statutory right under existing jurisprudence. Because democracy and free and fair elections form part of the basic structure of the Constitution, leaving the voter's core right outside the constitutional core creates a significant legal contradiction that scholars and judges have increasingly noted. In recent cases like Anup Baranwal from 2023, judges have increasingly referred to voting as a constitutional right, signaling a potential shift away from the narrow statutory view held for decades. This evolving judicial thinking represents an important trend for aspirants to track and incorporate into their answers on electoral rights. Challenges, reforms, and way forward. Managing electoral rolls and voting rights involves significant administrative and social challenges that require comprehensive reforms. Administrative friction is a major hurdle in the system. The extensive use of school teachers and field workers as booth-level officers for long special intensive revision exercises creates severe staffing shortages and academic losses in state schools, disrupting the educational calendar and creating governance challenges. Furthermore, there is a critical need for protecting marginalized voters from exclusion. The system must ensure that strict documentation rules required during verification exercises do not disproportionately exclude poor or migrant populations from the electoral roll, as this would undermine the principle of universal adult suffrage. Moving forward, there is a strong argument for elevating the status of the vote constitutionally. This requires re-evaluating older legal precedents to officially recognize the right of every eligible citizen to participate in elections as a fundamental core part of our constitutional democracy, rather than a mere statutory privilege subject to legislative modification. UPSC Corner, Value Addition, and PYQ Linkage. For prelims preparation, a 2017 previous year question asked, "The right to vote and to be elected in India is a fundamental right, natural right, constitutional right, or legal right?" The correct answer is legal right, reflecting the current statutory status despite ongoing debates about potential elevation to fundamental right status. This question pattern emphasizes the importance of precise terminological knowledge in Indian constitutional law. For mains practice, a model question states the following: in a constitutional order where democracy forms part of the basic structure, treating the right to vote merely as a statutory privilege appears incongruous. Discuss this statement in light of the Supreme Court's evolving electoral jurisprudence. This 15-mark, 250-word answer requires integrating constitutional theory with judicial trends. The key insight for mains is that voting is the primary instrument through which popular sovereignty is exercised, and separating democratic health from the voter's legal status undermines governance transparency and constitutional integrity in fundamental ways. Segment 3. Urban Governance and Disaster Preparedness. Slide 14. Urban Governance and Disaster Preparedness. The multi-layered dilemma plaguing Indian urban administration is one of the most significant governance challenges facing the country. Administration in major Indian cities is split across a confusing and inefficient array of overlapping agencies with unclear mandates. This disastrous policy impact prevents coordinated long-term planning, leading to systemic governance gaps and paralyzed decision-making during extreme weather crises when rapid, unified response is most needed. The case study of Mumbai illustrates this fragmentation clearly. Authority is deeply split between the municipal corporation handling local roads and drainage, the India Meteorological Department providing weather forecasting, the state government coordinating broader response, and central highway bodies managing national infrastructure. Each agency operates within its own silo with limited coordination mechanisms. For aspirants, this case study provides a concrete example of governance fragmentation that can be analyzed using constitutional provisions, the 74th Amendment framework, and principles of administrative coordination to craft high-scoring answers on urban governance challenges. Syllabus focus, urbanization and disaster management. Indian urban centers face a significant mitigation deficit in disaster preparedness. While cities have improved at executing emergency shutdowns to save lives during acute crisis, they severely lag behind in implementing the proactive infrastructure upgrades needed to prevent disasters in the first place. This reactive rather than proactive posture represents a fundamental failure of long-term urban planning and governance vision. This lack of preparation leads to cascading system failures when extreme monsoonal events occur. Heavy rain can cause landslides, flood motorways, and halt rail links, paralyzing regional economic hubs and creating humanitarian crisis. Ultimately, this results in a massive loss of public assets as the continuous delay in executing vital infrastructure upgrades leaves densely populated urban colonies and housing units highly vulnerable to predictable seasonal events. Understanding this cascade from governance failure to infrastructure deficit to humanitarian crisis is essential for crafting comprehensive answers on urban disaster management. 74th Constitutional Amendment. The 74th Constitutional Amendment Act established a clear constitutional mandate to empower urban local bodies as self-governing institutions, fully capable of planning for economic development and social justice in their jurisdictions. This amendment was designed to decentralize urban governance and bring democratic accountability closer to citizens through elected municipal leadership with substantive powers. However, there is a severe devolution deficit in practice. ULBs face critical shortages of both dedicated financial resources and technical personnel, leaving them heavily dependent on erratic state and central funding to function. Consequently, this creates a massive infrastructure gap because local bodies lack independent town planning power and financial autonomy. Municipal upgrades consistently fail to keep pace with rapid urbanization and shifting climate realities, leaving cities highly vulnerable. For examination purposes, aspirants must understand both the constitutional vision of the 74th Amendment and the practical implementation gaps that undermine its objectives. Best practices and global examples. To improve urban resilience, India must look toward successful global models and adapt best practices to local contexts. From an engineering perspective, the Tokyo Underground Discharge Channel is a massive, high-tech subterranean water surge tank system designed to divert overflow from major rivers during typhoons, effectively protecting the metropolitan center from catastrophic flooding through innovative infrastructure. From a nature-based perspective, the Sponge Cities model, widely implemented in China, offers sustainable urban design solutions utilizing permeable green pathways and urban wetlands to absorb and recycle storm water rather than overloading traditional municipal drains. From a governance perspective, cities must establish structured unified command structures to streamline disaster management. This involves single-window urban emergency management boards replacing overlapping local authorities, ensuring quick and accountable response. These three approaches combined offer a comprehensive template for Indian cities seeking to build genuine climate resilience through integrated planning. UPSC Value Addition Mains Question. For mains preparation, a key quote to remember states the following: if our cities cannot survive the regular monsoon, our investments in high-speed connectivity will prove to be expensive mistakes. This captures the fundamental relationship between basic infrastructure resilience and broader development ambitions. A model practice question asks candidates to analyze how the core problem plaguing urban disaster management in India is not a lack of funding but a fragmented governance model that splits accountability across multiple independent agencies, with reference to recent monsoonal crisis in metropolitan cities. This 15-mark, 250-word answer requires synthesizing both governance deficits and physical climate realities. The evaluator's answer tip emphasizes focusing on synthesizing the governance deficits arising from 74th Amendment failures with the physical realities of climate change to provide a holistic answer. This integrated approach demonstrates the analytical depth that examiners reward in high-scoring responses on urban governance and disaster management topics. Segment 4: Climate Change and Extreme Weather Events. Climate change and extreme weather events. India is currently facing significant climate anomalies that threaten broad economic stability and require urgent policy responses. The southwest monsoon started with a severe 40% rainfall deficit in its first month, starkly highlighting the growing unpredictability of seasonal weather patterns that millions of Indians depend upon for their livelihoods and daily lives. This kind of extreme departure from historical averages represents a fundamental breakdown in climate predictability. The India Meteorological Department forecast indicates that critical mid-monsoon rainfall will remain below normal, raising significant economic and ecological concerns across multiple sectors. Central ministries have issued high-level alerts for this phenomenon, which could severely disrupt agricultural output and strain state water management networks. The Super El Niño threat adds another layer of complexity to an already challenging climate scenario. For aspirants, understanding these climate indicators and their cascading impacts is essential for both preliminary factual questions and main analytical answers on contemporary climate governance challenges facing India. Extreme weather events in India. India is uniquely vulnerable to a double-edged monsoonal threat that manifests in seemingly contradictory ways simultaneously. The country faces an asymmetric climate challenge where severe, long-term dry spells and droughts across major agrarian belts occur simultaneously with intense, short-duration downpours that flood urban centers. This paradox makes climate adaptation particularly difficult as different regions require vastly different response strategies. Beyond rainfall, India is caught in a temperature-humidity trap. Rising heat waves, when paired with high humidity levels, create severe heat stress that severely impacts public health, drastically reduces labor productivity, and lowers livestock yields. Historical warning signs clearly map this vulnerability through major monsoonal failures and droughts in years like 1972, 1982, 2009, and 2015, illustrating exactly how strongly changing oceanic currents over the Pacific impact India's fundamental food security. This historical pattern provides crucial context for understanding current climate vulnerabilities and projecting future risks. Impacts on economy, agriculture, and society. The erratic weather patterns pose a direct threat to Kharif sowing, the critical monsoon cropping season. Below normal seasonal rainfall disrupts the cultivation cycles of staple crops like paddy and maize, threatening to drive up retail food inflation and create food security concerns for millions. This agricultural disruption has cascading effects throughout the economy and society, particularly for vulnerable populations. This creates an asymmetric employment shock that exposes the structural vulnerability of the Indian economy. While agriculture contributes roughly one-fifth of India's gross value added, it employs 46% of the workforce and supports 55% of the population, leaving a vast majority exposed to climate-related livelihood disruptions. Consequently, this generates severe macroeconomic pressures as lower crop yields force the government to draw down buffer stocks, curb exports, and rely on imports, straining the current account deficit and weakening the rupee. For examination answers, aspirants must connect climate events to economic outcomes comprehensively. Adaptation, mitigation, and government initiatives. To combat these climate threats, the government relies on several strategic frameworks designed to build resilience. The National Action Plan on Climate Change serves as a comprehensive national strategy, running specific missions focused on sustainable agriculture, water conservation, and strategic knowledge building to address long-term climate challenges through coordinated policy action. To protect farmers from immediate shocks, the government uses nutrient-based subsidy frameworks, with central interventions helping shield farmers from volatile input costs during periods of severe weather stress. Additionally, transitioning to climate-smart agriculture requires moving away from standard post-disaster crop insurance toward proactive, ex-ante risk reduction by investing heavily in water-efficient irrigation networks and developing climate-resilient crop varieties. A key intervention is the massive 41,533 crore rupee Kharif fertilizer subsidy, a financial shield deployed to safeguard farming communities from unpredictable market fluctuations and severe climate-induced weather stress during the critical growing season. UPSC Revision, PYQ and Mains Question. For mains preparation, a 2022 previous year question asks candidates to explain the mechanism and occurrence of El Niño and its impact on the monsoon rainfall in India and how it affects the agrarian economy. This question tests both conceptual understanding of climate phenomena and their practical implications for Indian agriculture and rural livelihoods. A model practice question states: with climate change making the southwest monsoon increasingly erratic, India must move past simple crop insurance and focus on long-term ex-ante risk reduction. Evaluate the steps needed to climate-proof the agrarian economy against Super El Niño events. This 15-mark, 250-word answer requires integrating both macroeconomic impacts like inflation and current account deficits with structural agricultural shifts toward climate-smart agriculture and improved irrigation networks. The integration focus emphasizes that high-scoring answers must connect climate science with economic policy and agricultural transformation strategies for comprehensive analysis. Segment 5. Monsoon Disasters and Management. Monsoon and flood scenario in India. India's changing monsoonal footprint represents one of the most significant disaster management challenges of our time. The core focus areas include disaster management, risk mitigation, and institutional resilience, addressing increasingly volatile monsoon footprints, extreme localized downpours, widespread flooding, landslides, and urban drainage infrastructure limits that together create compounding crises during the 4-month monsoon season. Understanding the changing monsoonal footprint requires analyzing how climate change has altered traditional rainfall patterns, making them more intense, unpredictable, and concentrated in shorter time periods. This shift overwhelms infrastructure designed for historical averages and creates cascading failures across interconnected systems. For aspirants, this topic provides a comprehensive framework for analyzing disaster vulnerability, institutional response mechanisms, and the policy changes needed to build genuine resilience against increasingly extreme weather events affecting hundreds of millions of Indians annually. Floods, landslides, and disaster risks. The core challenge in monsoonal disaster management is that linear development projects in ecologically fragile zones significantly amplify disaster risks during heavy rainfall events. Extreme monsoonal rainfall triggers sudden landslides and severe soil erosion in hilly regions as upstream slopes saturated with water become unstable. These upstream triggers then cascade into broader system failures. Mudslides block major motorways and choke vital rail routes mid-transit, while in urban areas, drainage system backups and high tides stall storm water lines in megacities. The cascading effects trigger widespread power cuts, transport halts, and building collapses across affected regions. This cascade demonstrates how a single extreme weather event can paralyze entire regional economies and create humanitarian emergencies. For examination purposes, aspirants must understand these interconnected risk pathways to craft comprehensive answers on disaster management that address both immediate response and underlying vulnerability factors. NDMA Guidelines on Flood and Landslide Management. The National Disaster Management Authority has issued comprehensive guidelines on flood and landslide management that provide a framework for proactive disaster risk reduction. First, scientific hazard mapping is mandated, requiring high-resolution landslide and flood hazard vulnerability mapping to restrict hazardous construction work in high-risk zones before disasters occur. Second, early warning systems must integrate meteorological warning grids that connect local radar networks with community alert systems to give vulnerable settlements time to evacuate. Third, structural safety audits require regular inspections of older commercial buildings, public transport networks, and retaining structures ahead of the monsoon season. The UPSC Mains note emphasizes that effective disaster management requires strict, proactive adherence to NDMA protocols rather than post-disaster relief distribution. This paradigm shift from reactive to proactive governance represents the conceptual framework examiners expect aspirants to demonstrate in their answers. Building institutional resilience against monsoonal threats. Resilience requires proactive and coordinated administrative action across multiple agencies and levels of government. Coordinated response teams involve deploying specialized units from the National Disaster Response Force and state disaster response forces to high-risk zones ahead of expected weather anomalies, ensuring rapid response capability is positioned before crises develop. Protecting reservoir storage capacity requires proactively managing national water reservoirs based on Central Water Commission guidelines to balance storage levels before heavy inflows arrive, preventing both flooding and water scarcity. Upgrading structural redundancy means designing transport and power infrastructure with built-in backups to prevent single-point failures from paralyzing entire regional economies. These three pillars of institutional resilience represent a comprehensive approach to disaster risk reduction that goes beyond emergency response to address systemic vulnerabilities through coordinated planning and infrastructure investment. Disaster management paradigm shift. The essential conceptual pivot for UPSC candidates is the strategic mandate of moving disaster policy away from reactive emergency responses toward long-term, structural risk reduction that addresses root causes. This paradigm shift represents a fundamental change in how the government approaches disaster management, prioritizing prevention and mitigation over relief and rehabilitation. A mains practice question asks candidates to analyze how monsoonal disasters in India are increasingly exacerbated by unsustainable infrastructure projects in ecologically fragile zones, examining the balance between linear development and disaster risk reduction under the NDMA framework. The evaluation focus emphasizes that aspirants must explicitly integrate and explain the structural paradigms of hazard mapping, structural redundancy, and institutional resilience to construct high-scoring answers. This integrated approach demonstrates the analytical sophistication that distinguishes exceptional answers from merely adequate responses. Segment 6. Samagra Shiksha and Education Governance. Samagra Shiksha, Institutional Oversight and Governance. Recent governance audits by law enforcement and intelligence wings have initiated investigations inside state educational offices regarding the selection and distribution of unauthorized books across school libraries. The controversial books were approved and circulated under Samagra Shiksha, the center's overarching flagship scheme for school education governance, raising serious questions about content vetting mechanisms and institutional oversight. This topic is highly relevant for General Studies Paper 2, particularly for topics relating to the development and management of the social sector, including education, and the critical mechanisms required for quality control and institutional oversight. The case highlights how flagship welfare schemes require robust monitoring frameworks to prevent mission drift and maintain quality standards. For aspirants, understanding both the policy architecture of Samagra Shiksha and the governance challenges it faces is essential for crafting comprehensive answers on education policy and administrative accountability in social sector programs. Samagra Shiksha Scheme Objectives and Integrated School Education. Samagra Shiksha represents an overarching flagship scheme designed to ensure inclusive, equitable, and quality education across India. It establishes a unified administrative structure across all levels of school learning, creating a comprehensive framework for educational development from preschool through class 12, integrating 3 previously separate schemes into one coherent program. The scheme builds on 3 historical components. Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan historically targeted universalizing elementary education, focusing on bridging gender and social gaps, establishing school standards, and improving basic primary school access. Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan is geared towards upgrading secondary education, focusing on quality enhancement, boosting gross enrollment, and removing socioeconomic barriers to higher learning. Teacher education strengthens the institutional capacity of teacher training institutions, aiming to improve teacher qualifications and elevate academic research. Additionally, library and infrastructure support provides targeted central funding for digital labs, building upgrades, and library books to enhance reading and literacy. School Education Governance Framework. Education being a concurrent list subject requires close funding and operational cooperation between the Central Ministry of Education and state-line departments. This constitutional arrangement creates both opportunities for coordinated action and challenges in maintaining consistent quality standards across diverse state contexts with varying administrative capacities and political priorities. At the state level, state implementation societies serve as nodal administrative bodies set up to implement Samagra Shiksha directives, purchase learning materials, and manage central funds flowing from the national level. For content and quality control, the selection of reading materials and curricula is guided by expert statutory bodies like the NCERT at the national level and state councils of educational research and training at the state level. These bodies are designed to maintain national standards and institutional neutrality, though their effectiveness varies significantly across states. Understanding this multilayered governance structure is essential for answering questions on education policy implementation. Governance breakdowns and educational challenges. The approval and circulation of controversial titles in school libraries without rigorous content screening highlights severe gaps in state-level quality control mechanisms, creating what experts term a vetting vacuum in the system. This breakdown undermines the educational mission and exposes students to inappropriate content while also raising questions about administrative accountability and institutional oversight. Schools face administrative disruptions by enlisting thousands of trained government school teachers for long, full-time non-academic state duties, such as electoral roll revisions during SIR exercises. This creates critical classroom shortages and disrupts learning calendars, forcing schools to merge classes or leave curricula incomplete ahead of key term examinations. This resource drag from diverting teachers to administrative roles represents a significant hidden cost of poor interdepartmental coordination, as education sector personnel are treated as a readily available administrative resource without consideration of pedagogical consequences. Policy recommendations and mains framework. To address these governance challenges, several policy reforms are essential. First, Enforcing strict screening mandates requires establishing independent, multi-member review boards at the State Implementation Society level to audit all library procurements before distribution to schools, ensuring content quality and appropriateness. Second, protecting academic hours means restricting deployment of trained teaching personnel for non-scholastic state work, ensuring school calendars are protected as mandated by the Right to Education Act. A model mains question asks candidates to evaluate how the success of integrated education programs like Samagra Shiksha depends heavily on maintaining strong content vetting mechanisms and protecting academic hours from administrative disruptions, in light of recent governance challenges in school education. This 15-mark, 250-word answer requires integrating policy analysis with institutional reform recommendations. Aspirants should structure their responses to address both systemic governance issues and practical implementation challenges in education administration. Segment 7, Electoral Reforms. Electoral Roll Revision Process. Free and fair elections depend on a transparent, accurate registry of voters, which is maintained through seasonal revisions to include new voters and remove invalid entries. This continuous update mandate ensures that electoral rolls reflect current demographic realities while maintaining the integrity of the democratic process. The Special Intensive Revision represents a critical mechanism featuring a detailed, document-heavy door-to-door verification drive run by the state to comprehensively verify citizen data and update rolls. This process enlists thousands of field-level personnel, including school teachers and community health workers serving as booth-level officers, to distribute enumeration forms and directly verify citizen identities. The key objective is democratic legitimacy, as an accurate, fully verified registry prevents disenfranchisement and curbs electoral fraud, forming the operational bedrock of fair elections. For aspirants, understanding the mechanics of electoral roll management and the institutional architecture supporting it is essential for answering questions on electoral governance and the functioning of democratic institutions. Role and powers of the Election Commission. The electoral roll process is anchored by the Constitution through Article 324, which grants the Election Commission of India supreme authority over superintendence, direction, and control of electoral rolls. This constitutional provision establishes the ECI as the ultimate authority on all matters related to election administration, including voter registration, with power that supersedes executive interference in technical matters. The ECI operates with absolute independent authority, possessing sole regulatory power over the Special Intensive Revision process. Executive state structures are legally barred from interfering with or modifying registration data, ensuring the integrity of the electoral process. Crucially, under Section 24 of the Representation of the People Act of 1950, there is a clear legal pathway for grievances. Any citizen aggrieved by an incorrect voter roll modification has a statutory right to appeal directly to the district collector and state chief electoral officer. The core principle is insulating democracy by completely isolating registration rolls from state executive control while establishing direct avenues for citizen redress. Challenges in voter registration. The integrity of the electoral roll faces several significant hurdles that undermine the system's effectiveness. The verification gap emerges when opposition delegations raise issues about field workers filling out enumeration forms from community spaces rather than executing mandatory door-to-door visits as required by the SIR protocol, compromising the thoroughness of the verification process. Documentation errors present another major challenge, as the document-heavy verification process can lead to arbitrary deletion of valid voters in complex border districts or areas with historical migration patterns. This creates particular hardship for marginalized communities who may lack documentation or have informal living arrangements. Additionally, The academic cost is substantial, as deploying thousands of state school teachers for full-time electoral registry duties over long months causes staffing shortages that disrupt regular school learning. These challenges reveal the tension between electoral integrity objectives and the practical implementation costs of achieving them. Electoral reforms and best practices. To address registration challenges, structural reforms must prioritize secure, audited software, formal accountability procedures, and professional staff dedication. First, adopting verifiable digital auditing means transitioning from unverified mobile apps and private messaging groups toward secure, geotagged digital registration software with built-in verification logs that create an auditable trail for all registration actions. Second, enforcing double-blind verifications requires restricting voter deletions by mandating that no name can be removed without a clear, written explanation and prior formal notice to the individual, ensuring transparency in the deletion process. Third, setting up a dedicated election cadre involves creating a separate, professional cadre of electoral registration staff to relieve school teachers and healthcare workers from long non-scholastic state duties, thereby preventing academic drain. These reforms collectively address both the technical and human resource challenges of maintaining accurate electoral rolls while minimizing disruption to other essential public services. UPSC Notes and Practice Questions. For prelims practice on the Representation of the People Act 1950, aspirants must remember that under Section 24, an elector aggrieved by an entry or deletion can file a formal appeal directly before the district collector or electoral registration officer. This is the correct option among possible choices, testing knowledge of statutory appeal mechanisms in electoral governance. The core constitutional principle underlying this framework is universal adult suffrage, a fundamental constitutional guarantee. Exclusion from the electoral roll directly affects a citizen's basic democratic rights and must be approached with appropriate procedural safeguards. For mains practice, a model question states the following. While the special intensive revision is essential to maintain the integrity of electoral rolls, it faces critical operational challenges related to field-level verification errors and the deployment of non-scholastic state personnel. Suggest structural reforms. This 15-mark, 250-word answer requires aspirants to propose comprehensive solutions addressing both technical and administrative dimensions of electoral roll management. Segment 8, Constitutional Morality and Rule of Law. Constitutional morality, concept and core definition. Constitutional morality represents a deep commitment to the values, principles, and democratic processes built into the text of the Constitution, moving past simple reliance on popular majority sentiment. This concept goes beyond textual rules to require public institutions and citizens to respect the spirit of the Constitution, ensuring that executive actions align with core values like equality, non-discrimination, and fairness in all circumstances. This topic maps to both General Studies Paper 2 on Constitutionalism and Basic Structure Doctrine and General Studies Paper 4 on Public Administration Ethics and Values Guiding State Power. For aspirants, constitutional morality provides a framework for analyzing governance decisions not just on legal compliance but on alignment with foundational constitutional values. Understanding this concept is essential for tackling questions on judicial review, fundamental rights interpretation, and the ethical dimensions of public administration in a constitutional democracy committed to pluralism and individual dignity. Rule of law and democratic governance. The rule of law is a foundational principle requiring that governance must be guided by clear, transparent legal rules rather than the arbitrary choices of individual officials or political leaders. This principle ensures predictability, accountability, and equal treatment under law, forming the bedrock of legitimate governance in a constitutional democracy committed to justice and fairness for all citizens. The rule of law serves as a legal checkpoint guaranteeing that every citizen, regardless of status or background, has equal access to legal protection and faces the same standards of justice. In a mature democracy, the right to voice political opinions and engage in public criticism is protected as a core feature of the rule of law, enabling robust democratic deliberation and accountability mechanisms. For examination purposes, aspirants must connect the rule of law with democratic governance, judicial independence, and the protection of fundamental rights to demonstrate comprehensive understanding. Landmark Supreme Court Judgments. The Keswananda Bharti vs. State of Kerala case from 1973 established the basic structure doctrine, ruling that while Parliament has broad powers to amend the law, it cannot alter the foundational features of the Constitution such as democracy and the rule of law. This landmark judgment represents the cornerstone of Indian constitutional jurisprudence on the limits of parliamentary sovereignty and the inviolability of core constitutional values. The A.S. Muhammad Rafi vs. State of Tamil Nadu case from 2010 ruled that collective attempts by local groups to deny legal representation to specific individuals are illegal, unconstitutional, and violate professional ethics. The Nota judgment from 2013 recognized that a voter's choice to reject all candidates is a protected form of political expression under Article 19, 1A, reinforcing the constitutional role of individual choice. These three judgments collectively demonstrate how the Supreme Court has shaped constitutional morality and protected fundamental rights through innovative interpretation of existing provisions. Contemporary challenges to constitutional morality. Modern governance faces several threats to constitutional values that require vigilant analysis and response. Sectarian policy tweaks, such as introducing major administrative shifts along religious or identity-based lines, create complex legal challenges and test constitutional commitments to secularism and equal treatment of all citizens regardless of religious affiliation. Bypassing legal procedures represents another significant threat, as collective resolutions by professional bodies to deny legal representation to unpopular defendants threaten the fundamental right to a fair trial guaranteed under Article 21. The threat of arbitrary actions, using state power to suppress political criticism or bypass due legal process, deeply undermines public trust in the integrity of the legal system and constitutional governance. These contemporary challenges require constant vigilance from the judiciary, media, civil society, and engaged citizens to defend constitutional morality against erosion through incremental executive overreach or majoritarian pressure. Ethics and Mains Answer Framework. A key value to uphold is that a fair trial requires extending the same legal protections to every accused individual, regardless of public emotion or the nature of the alleged offense. This commitment to equal justice is fundamental to constitutional morality and the rule of law, requiring judges and administrators to resist popular pressure when fundamental rights are at stake. A mains practice question asks candidates to evaluate how constitutional morality demands that institutions uphold the rule of law and due process even when facing intense popular emotion or political pressure in light of recent judicial rulings on the right to legal representation. This 15-mark, 250-word answer requires integrating constitutional theory with practical governance challenges. The aspirant structuring tip emphasizes integrating the landmark A.S. Muhammad Rafi judgment and constructing arguments on resisting arbitrary public sentiment to secure high-scoring marks. This analytical framework demonstrates the depth examiners expect in superior answers. Segment 9. Ethics in Disaster Governance. Ethics in Disaster Governance. When municipal systems fail during predictable seasonal weather events, it represents a failure of administrative foresight and a significant gap in professional accountability that ethics frameworks must address. This topic maps to the General Studies Paper 4 syllabus section on public and civil service values, focusing on ethical frameworks, administrative integrity, citizen-centric policies, and institutional moral accountability. The core mandate for public officials is to move beyond simple checklist compliance, committing to an active ethical duty to protect human lives and preserve public safety. This requires proactive engagement with potential risks, not merely reactive compliance with minimum standards. For aspirants, understanding the ethical dimensions of disaster governance provides a framework for analyzing case studies, evaluating administrative decisions, and proposing reforms that strengthen institutional accountability while centering human welfare and dignity in governance practices during crisis. Accountability during disasters. Splitting administrative authority across multiple independent agencies allows officials to deflect blame, leaving vulnerable communities exposed during disasters. This fragmented responsibility trap is a major ethical failure as accountability becomes diffuse and no single agency or official takes ownership of systemic failures that lead to preventable suffering and loss. Approving or ignoring substandard construction work in ecologically fragile or low-lying urban areas creates severe risks during extreme weather events, representing ethical failures in regulatory oversight and quality control. When public works cave in shortly after completion, it fundamentally undermines public trust in the competence and integrity of state institutions, creating legitimacy crises that extend far beyond the immediate disaster. For examination purposes, aspirants should analyze how institutional fragmentation, regulatory capture, and accountability gaps combine to create conditions for disasters and propose structural reforms to address root causes. Leadership and citizen-centric governance in crisis. True citizen-centric governance requires administrative leaders to provide transparent, accurate information during emergencies rather than downplaying structural failures or shifting blame to external factors. The ethics of communication are fundamental to maintaining public trust and enabling informed citizen response during crises when accurate information can save lives. Disaster planning must focus emergency resources on high-risk, low-income pockets like crowded urban colonies that bear the brunt of severe weather. Prioritizing vulnerable populations represents a core ethical commitment to equity and justice in crisis response. Treating infrastructure failures as data points for future risk reduction rather than isolated accidents is a core feature of responsible, ethical leadership that prioritizes systemic learning over individual blame. These three principles collectively define the ethical standards expected of public administrators during disaster response and recovery operations. Case studies and best practices in ethical governance. Several best practices demonstrate ethical governance in disaster management contexts. A prompt executive audit involves launching immediate, independent technical investigations into broken public works to fix accountability, rather than waiting for public anger to fade or engaging in defensive cover-ups that undermine institutional credibility. Community-led risk reduction involves engaging local resident welfare associations and community volunteers directly in checking flood paths and clearing drainage lines ahead of heavy rains, building social capital and local ownership of disaster preparedness. Proactive construction restrictions utilize timely municipal directives to halt hazardous excavation and building work before severe monsoonal weather arrives, preventing conditions that amplify disaster impacts. These active administrative solutions build public trust and replace passive crisis management with systemic accountability, demonstrating how ethical governance translates into practical disaster risk reduction outcomes. GS4 Case Study Practice. The case study scenario presents a complex ethical challenge. You are the municipal commissioner of a coastal megacity, and heavy seasonal downpours have flooded a major highway and triggered a structural collapse in a low-income colony, causing casualties. A recently built public culvert has caved in due to blocked water pressure, elevating questions of engineering standards. Local groups demand immediate suspensions, while the engineering department claims it was an unavoidable climate anomaly. Key questions to address include the following. First, identifying the competing values and core ethical dilemmas present in this scenario, including tensions between accountability and fairness, urgency and due process, public safety and individual rights. Second, detailing immediate administrative steps to secure the area and assist the affected population, balancing life-saving priorities with procedural requirements. Third, outlining an administrative framework to fix structural accountability and prevent future failures through systemic reforms. This case study approach tests aspirants' ability to apply ethical frameworks to complex, real-world administrative challenges requiring balanced judgment and principled decision-making. Segment 10. Urban Infrastructure Planning. Urban Infrastructure Challenges, Syllabus and Scale Focus. The core challenge plaguing major Indian cities is that rapid urbanization is evolving significantly faster than municipal infrastructure upgrades, creating a severe governance and planning deficit. A critical structural vulnerability seen across multiple megacities is the drainage deficit, where old urban drainage networks are systematically overwhelmed by short, intense downpours. This highlights the urgent mismatch between population scale and municipal infrastructural capacities. For the UPSC General Studies Paper 3 syllabus, this topic directly integrates infrastructure planning, investment models, urban development, and climate adaptation strategies. The scale of the challenge requires administrators to move beyond siloed planning and address the infrastructural bottlenecks that completely paralyze city ecosystems and economies during extreme weather events. For aspirants, understanding the magnitude of urban infrastructure deficits and their cascading impacts provides essential context for analyzing policy proposals and evaluating governance reforms in this critical domain of public administration. Stormwater drainage and flood management choke points. Several critical choke points undermine stormwater management in Indian cities. Haphazard urban expansion and rapid concretization prevent natural ground absorption, leading to massive surface runoff spikes and the systematic loss of critical flood buffering urban wetlands that historically absorbed excess rainfall. Public transit systems, major roadways, and power grids lack critical redundancy loops, meaning that in the event of localized flooding, a single node failure instantly paralyzes the entire city's mobility networks. Historic rainfall assumptions used to design drainage systems are obsolete, and in coastal cities, the severe tidal lock-in effect stalls outfall discharge when high tides coincide with heavy rainfall, preventing gravity-based drainage from functioning. The critical blockage and outlet analysis demonstrates how localized debris accumulation interacts with undersized infrastructure to trigger backflow and surcharging. Municipal planning must transition from archaic static designs to dynamic, climate-resilient stormwater modeling to handle modern precipitation spikes and prevent the cascading failures that currently paralyze urban areas during monsoon events. Sustainable urban planning, watershed and smart grid solutions. The traditional reactive approach relying on simple pre-monsoon desilting or emergency shutdowns is an unsustainable strategy for expanding urban centers facing climate change. This reactive model represents a temporary, crisis-driven response instead of establishing permanent, proactive climate-resilient frameworks. Simple desilting ignores natural water flow lines, leaving megacities highly vulnerable to severe flooding and system failures that require increasingly expensive emergency interventions. The modern proactive approach involves holistic and dynamic integration of multiple solutions. The watershed approach manages drainage across political boundaries, preserving critical blue-green infrastructure including water bodies and parks that provide natural absorption and storage. Smart grid systems integrate automated tidal gates, high-capacity pumps, and IoT real-time sensor networks to manage flows dynamically based on current conditions. This integrated approach combining green infrastructure, smart technology, and cross-jurisdictional coordination offers a comprehensive template for building climate-resilient urban drainage systems capable of handling future challenges. Schemes and global best practices, Amrit and Sponge cities. To construct highly climate-resilient urban infrastructure, India leverages primary central initiatives designed to fund extensive overhauls of legacy municipal drainage systems. The Amrit scheme provides critical funding mechanisms focused on comprehensive modernization of municipal drainage and drinking water systems. The Smart Cities mission integrates climate-resilient technologies and advanced stormwater modeling directly into municipal master planning, creating demonstration projects that can be scaled across urban India. Global templates offer valuable lessons for adaptation. The Sponge Cities initiative, pioneered in China, replaces hard concrete surfaces with permeable green pathways, urban wetlands, and open absorption parks that capture storm runoff naturally. Subterranean storage involves establishing underground water retention vaults at key traffic nodes to safely store peak runoff and prevent urban flooding, as exemplified by Tokyo's monumental subterranean water discharge channels. These Indian schemes combined with global best practices provide a comprehensive toolkit for building climate-resilient urban infrastructure. UPSC Revision Framework and Model Mains Practice Question. The core takeaway for GS Paper 3 preparation is that urban infrastructure planning must transition from static asset creation to dynamic, climate-proof resilience frameworks. Aspirants must structure their analysis around the shift from reactive to proactive governance, integrating smart technology, watershed management, and global templates to demonstrate comprehensive understanding of contemporary urban challenges. A model mains practice question states the following: with climate change making seasonal rainfall increasingly unpredictable, urban infrastructure planning based on historic weather assumptions is bound to fail. Analyze the changes required to build climate-proof stormwater drainage systems in India's megacities. This 15-mark, 250-word answer requires a structured approach, first identifying the choke points, including concretization, tidal lock-ins, and data mismatch. Then proposing sustainable solutions like Amrit, subterranean storage, and real-time sensors, and concluding with the necessity of holistic, climate-resilient urban governance. This systematic approach demonstrates the analytical rigor examiners reward in high-scoring responses. Thank you for engaging with this comprehensive breakdown of 7th July UPSC curriculum, covering 10 crucial learning modules across General Studies Papers 2, 3, and 4. Your dedication to mastering disaster management, governance, environmental issues, education policy, constitutional morality, and ethics is what drives quality learning outcomes and examination success. This curriculum has equipped you with structured knowledge on Mumbai floods and climate-resilient infrastructure, citizenship and electoral rights, urban governance and disaster preparedness, extreme weather events, monsoon disaster management, Samagra Shiksha and education governance, electoral reforms, constitutional morality, disaster ethics, and urban infrastructure planning. Each module provides exam-orientated frameworks for both preliminary factual questions and main analytical answers. Turn on notifications to stay updated in real time and never miss critical UPSC updates, instant syllabus insights, and model answers. Subscribe to join our growing learning community and receive continuous, structured preparation support designed to help you clear your examinations with confidence. Access revision modules and connect with serious aspirants committed to excellence. Together, we turn vast syllabus topics into structured knowledge, helping you approach the UPSC Civil Services examination with clarity, confidence, and comprehensive preparation that maximizes your scorecard potential. Empower your journey toward success.